Buonasera. Buonasera a tutti. Good evening, everyone. I'm talking English. Welcome to the fourth appointment of the course Healing Words. This evening, we will talk about writing therapy. As usual, I will make a brief introduction to the topic. Although our species has been using words for over 100,000 years, writing is a rather recent acquisition dating back some 1,000 years. Writing was invented around 5,000 years ago by the Sumerians in Mesopotamia. If we assimilate the span of a human language presence to 24 hours, it is as if it was only at 11 p.m. that writing appeared. According to ancient Egyptian thoughts, the god of writing had made the creation of the word effective through the words. So this is the importance the Egyptian gave to the writing. It is an established scientific fact that there are no structure in our brains specifically dedicated to the processing of written language, as opposed to spoken language. You can see the Broca area for language production and Wernicke area for the language comprehension, but we don't know where writing area is in our brain. Despite this, the urge to write accompanies and sometimes dominates our lives, as we are aware. There are many reasons why we take personal notes. For example, to remember things, to put in order rather confused ideas, to be more creative, to focus a specific topic, but also, as we discover in the lesson of today, less obvious, to relieve stress and to promote our health. Writing is certainly one of the most effective ways we have of expressing ourselves. Not only it allows to fix an emotion in a simplified and accessible form, but it enables us to visualize our thoughts and to protect them. We are lucky this evening to have the scientist who has discovered the power of expressive writing and has invented the term expressive writing as a therapy for our mental, but also for our physical health. Professor James Pennebaker, that I'm going to present before I call him here to the podium. James Pennebaker is Professor Emeritus of Psychology at the University of Texas at Austin. He is the inventor, as I said, and the pioneer of the therapeutic method called expressive writing. And writing therapy has been recognized by the American Psychological Association as one of the top scientific takeover on trauma, disclosure, and health. On this topic, he has published hundreds of scientific papers and several books, starting from the 80s, so more than 40 years ago, probably. Today, expressive writing is used in psychotherapy, education, business, and serves as a therapeutic strategy for disorders like chronic pain and depression also. In the mid-90s, he has developed a computerized text analysis program called the Linguistic Enquiry and Word Count, This program, computing the count of words types, allows to anticipate the improvement from writing therapy, but also to describe the psychological and personality traits of a person. So now, thanks to the research of James Pennebaker, we have powerful means to help understand people dealing with traumatic experiences. Professor Pennebaker, dear Jamie, we are eager to hear your talk. Please come to the podium.
It's a real honor to be here, and I'm excited to be here partly to see this new university, but also to come to Lugano. This is one part of Switzerland or Italy that I've never been to. Today what I'd like to do is to provide an overview of the research that I've done on expressive writing, and that will be the bulk of what I'll be talking about. But then at the end, give you a flavor of some of the other topics that I am now going to. Yes, by the way, I'm James Pennebaker. In case there was any mistake there. Okay. So today, what I'm going to do is I'll begin talking about the development of this and give you a sense of just how it moved forward. I did not start off sitting in my lab one day thinking, I have a new approach to writing. Rather, I never thought about writing. I never thought about language. I never thought about therapy. When I was in graduate school, I was interested in how people how do they know how they feel? How do you know you're anxious? In other words, what cues are you using in your body for you to determine that you're anxious? Is your heart beating fast right now? How do you know? We all can make an educated guess, but where does that information come from? And that was the central question I was asking. And I had done a number of studies on the psychology of physical symptoms and was writing a book, and I thought I should do a questionnaire and see if there's certain types of people who report lots of symptoms. So I did something I'd never done before. I sat around with my students and I said, we're going to come up with a questionnaire and we can ask people anything you want. But the idea is we're trying to find out, is there any life experiences or personality related to this concept of reporting physical symptoms? So we sat around and one person would say, I want to know what kind of food people like. Okay. Another one said, how well do they get along with their mother? How well do they get along with their father? Fine. And then at some point, one of them said, how about this one? Prior to the age of 17, did you ever have a traumatic sexual experience? And I thought, great, sounds like a good question. Anyway, the questionnaire ended up being pages and pages long. We passed it out to hundreds and hundreds of students, and we found one question on that questionnaire that was related to every health item I had, and that was the sexual trauma question. At this time, I ended up being part of a national survey, and we included that general question, and we found people who reported having a traumatic sexual experience when they were young were much, much more likely to have been hospitalized in the previous year for any cause, more likely to have been diagnosed with cancer, more likely to have had high blood pressure, more likely in the last year to have an ulcer, colds, flus, everything we asked. But another thing that was interesting on that national questionnaire was several people said, this is the first time I've ever told anybody about it. And as I got into this, I realized that most people who had had a sexual trauma when they were young had either kept it secret or they may have told one person, maybe their mother or whatever, and the parent would deny it happened or tell them not to tell other people about it. And then I did some other questionnaires and ended up discovering that not only does having a traumatic sexual experience, not only is it associated with secrets, but actually what the problem was having a traumatic sexual experience is bad for you in terms of health, but keeping it secret makes it much worse in terms of its effects. And we did surveys with other large groups of adults and asked people if they'd had other traumatic experience in childhood and if they'd talked to others about it. And what we found in case after case was that if a person has a trauma that's bad, having a trauma and keeping it a secret is far, far worse. And this made me wonder, if keeping secrets is so toxic, what would happen if you asked people to come in the lab in some way disclose that trauma? And then did it really have to be a secret? Because there are parts of upsetting experiences that we don't talk to others about. So I did an experiment, a speculative experiment. And the idea was this. We asked people to come into the laboratory and to essentially write about, people were asked to take part in an experiment that would involve writing. And we told them the experiment would last for 4 days. They would come in each day and they would write about a topic for 15 or 20 minutes. But we didn't tell them what the topic was. And we did say some people may be asked to write about personal topics. And if you're willing to participate in this experiment, sign up for it. Oh, and they also had to agree to give us access to their health records, how often they went to the doctor. Okay, this study was done 40 years ago, and so the rules back then were a little bit looser. So what this first experiment was essentially, this is the basic paradigm that this first study did and subsequent studies did as well. People in the typical study were randomly assigned by a flip of the coin to either an experimental group where they would write about an upsetting experience or a traumatic experience that ideally they'd not talk to other people about, or they were asked to write about some superficial topics. And if you wrote about traumas on one day, you'd do it for all 4 days. If you wrote about superficial topics, it would be for all 4 days. The studies varied. Sometimes they write for 15 minutes, sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes 10. The very first study I'm telling you about, I think they wrote 15 minutes. And typically we'd have them write for 3 or 4 days. And so what would happen is they would come into the lab, they would talk to me or to somebody else. We'd tell them about the study, that here you've signed up to be in this experiment. Are you willing to write about something that may be personal? Will you give us access to your health records, et cetera? When they say yes, then we told them, if they're in the experimental group, you'll be writing about this, some kind of upsetting, traumatic experience, ideally one that you haven't talked to other people about, and there were some other rules as well. And if they were in the other group, they were told it was going to be a superficial topic. This is essentially what we said. For the next 3 days, this is for people in our trauma group, what I'd like you to do is to write about your very deepest thoughts and feelings about a deeply upsetting personal experience that you've had. Ideally one that you have not talked in detail with others. In your writing, I want you to really let go and explore your very deepest emotions and thoughts. In your writing, you'll be writing about the upsetting experience for all 4 days or 3 days. It could be the same one every day, or it could be a different topic every day. That's up to you. And in your writing, I want you to really to think about tying this upsetting experience to other things. You might write about how it's related to your childhood, or your family, or your relationship with other peoples or colleagues or lovers. It could be related to school, or who you'd like to be in the future, or maybe who you've been in the past, or who you are now. Many people, by the way, have not had a traumatic experience, but all of us have had major stressors or conflict, and you can write about that as well. But whatever you write about, I want you to really let go and explore your deepest thoughts and feelings. They were not given any feedback. In other words, at the end of their writing each day, they put an ID number on their writing. And they'd fill out a questionnaire, and then they'd put it in a big box as they walked out. And we told them we would never link their writing to their name. So from all practical purposes, their writing was anonymous. So there was no feedback, and they didn't, in that first study, we did not have them keep their own essays. But we told them if they wanted to see their essays later, they could come and we would make a copy and give it to them, which actually several people did. The writing technique from the very beginning was really powerful. And we discovered from that very first day, people wrote about unbelievable upsetting experiences. This was a college, it was an upper middle class college. Students on the surface seemed happy and healthy, but probably a third of them wrote about a major trauma that everybody in this room would agree was a major traumatic experience. And sometimes they would cry, but they all came back. We had nobody who didn't show up for all 3 days of the experiment. In that first study, we had about 50 people in the experiment. In any case, that was the basic technique. Now, what we did, we had various measures, but the primary one was whether or not people went to the doctor, the university doctor. At this particular private university, the student health center was right on campus, and students went to the student health center quite a bit, usually for things like colds and flus and headache and things like that. And we distinguished if the visit was for illness or if it was for something else. Well, what we found was that people who wrote about these traumatic experiences compared to the controls ended up going to the student health center at about half the rate as people in our control conditions. Remember our control conditions, they were asked to write about superficial things. Now it looks, in this graph, it looks as though we made our control people sick. We did not. This experiment was typically done in October or November, and the peak of illness season is usually in January and February. So people who were not in our experiment did what the control condition does. That is, they got sick over the course of the school semester. But unlike the controls and the people not in our experiments, those who wrote about upsetting experiences showed improvements in physical health. Now, I should tell you, this first study was a profound experience for me. First of all, I did the study, it was a speculative study. It never occurred to me the effects would be so dramatic. So I ended up doing another study, and then another study, and another study, and each study we got the same pattern. The second study actually that used the same technique, we worked with an immunologist and a psychoneuroimmunologist, and we drew blood from before they were assigned to a condition, at the end of the experiment, and then 6 weeks later. And we found greater markers of immune function, beneficial changes in immune function for people who were in the experimental condition as opposed to the control. So those were the first studies, and we published the very first one in 1986, even though we did it actually exactly 40 years ago in 1983. And once the first couple of studies came out, there started to be more and more studies that were conducted, first in the United States, then internationally. And now there are probably around 2,000 studies that have been done on expressive writing. And what I'd like to do is just give you a sense of some of the findings that have emerged from this. So across these various studies, I should tell you, one reason I love the expressive writing study is it was associated with hard outcomes. So many studies in social science are based just on people's questionnaires. and I don't trust questionnaires. I wanted to see hard data. I wanted to see that there was something that you could put your finger on that changed. So there have been various studies that have been done looking at how often people go to the doctor, also changes in various biological markers associated with illness. Also, people after writing tend to go to the hospital less, or they stay in the hospital fewer days than following surgery than people who are in any kind of control groups. Measures of students. We find that kids who write about upsetting experiences miss fewer days at school. People who are at work miss fewer days at work. We've done various studies, and not we, when I say we, I mean the research community, has shown reductions in alcohol consumption and cigarette smoking. And also there are biological markers associated with high alcohol uses, such as liver function, that show improvements after expressive writing. Many studies have been looking at depression and also at post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, that the symptoms there are less. And you can see some of these other changes. One thing I want to highlight is people after writing tend to sleep better, which, by the way, I think is a particularly important and probably drives some of these immune changes and others. And there's also some great work that's been done recently on wound healing, showing that there's improvement, that you can do actually wounds from surgery, but also experimental wounds where researchers, I would not want to be in these studies. You come into the lab and they punch a hole in your cheek or something inside your cheek or on your finger, and then they look and see how long it takes, how many days it takes for these wounds to heal, and you find that it works. The wound healing is faster with expressive writing. Now, it's also important to know that they're the broad samples of people who have benefited. It works for men just as well as women. It works just as well for older people, college students, and younger students as well. It's associated with improvements across languages and cultures. There have been studies that have been done on this in Japan, South Korea, several researchers here in Italy, here in Switzerland, but also there in Italy, have found benefits, but also across Europe, in several countries in South America, and as I said earlier, there's been about 2,000 studies, and these effects are associated with many other changes that are associated with certain changes in thinking, and I'll mention some of these. Now, this raises the question: is why does expressive writing work? The very first time I went out of the country, I went to Germany to give a talk at a health psychology meeting, which was made up of psychoanalysts. And here I go in, and I say, people wrote for 4 days for 20 minutes a day, and we find these improvements in health. It was one of the weirdest conferences I've ever been to, because usually people found this very interesting, and at the end, the level of applause was like this, and that was it. And then afterwards, I heard some screaming out in the hallway and so forth, and that night, there was a party, and it was like I had a disease. Nobody came to talk to me, but I went into the bathroom once, and a student came, and he looked around, and he said, "I loved your talk, it was wonderful." And that happened 2 or 3 times. I asked my host afterwards, and he said they were outraged. They spend years doing therapy, and I'm claiming I can bring about changes in the equivalent of 80 minutes. That's ridiculous. And what was interesting was they were missing the point. This method does not change people's lives forever. It does not change personality. What it does is it helps us to come to terms with a specific event. I often think of this as a almost as a life course correction. That if you've been obsessing about something or worrying about it, writing about the experience helps you to come to terms with it. It's not going to change your life forever. Your life is going to get messed up again in the future, and when that happens, writing can be beneficial. I think a better metaphor than changing, changing personality is that this is more like taking an antibiotic. That is, you're sick today, take the antibiotic and you're going to be better. But it's not going to guarantee that you're going to be better for the rest of your life. Unless, there are certain changes that result from this. And this gets to the deep-seated issue of why writing works. And over the last, I'm going to guess the last 40 years, there have been multiple people trying to figure out why is it writing makes such a big deal? How is it possible that writing can bring about these effects? Better grades, less other health problems, psychological problems, etc. I think there are a cascade of reasons. There's not one simple answer to it. So one is merely labeling an emotion or an emotional experience is really important. So for example, very often people, and I can say this because this is what I sometimes do myself. Something happens and my attitude is, well, I'm just not going to think about it. And then, of course, I start thinking about it. I should have said this, I should have done that, but I'm not going to think about it. I should talk to my wife about it. No, it'll just annoy her. And the point is that sitting down and writing about it, I'm essentially acknowledging it to myself. But there's been some other research suggesting, this is brain research using functional MRI methods, that the mere labeling of emotion, saying, I feel this, I feel that, brings about some changes within the brain that I think kind of quiets it in some way. A second really important issue is by putting something into words, it forces structure. And in fact, there have been all sorts of studies on what happens when you write things down. It changes things. It makes them much simpler. One of my favorite studies has been some research on eyewitness identification. And that is in psychology classrooms all over the world, on an introductory psychology class, one day the teacher will be up there and then some student comes into the room and steals something, maybe steals the instructor's briefcase or whatever, right there in front of everybody and goes away, and the instructor says, that person just stole my stuff, what's this all about, and so forth. And then he, if that person is me, will say, this half of the room, could you write down in real detail what happened and what that person looked like? And the people over here, could you write about something else? So they aren't doing that. What you find is, first of all, people who write about that experience have a much better sense of the experience. And say 2 weeks later, we bring in 4 or 5 people to now do identification to see if they can pick which person it is. And, it's like a lineup, so it's hard, they all look a little bit like the person who did it. What you find is the people who wrote about it actually do worse in identifying the person. Because what they are doing in their writing, they talk about what they wore, maybe how their hair is, and when the person comes back the next time, they're wearing something different, their hair is a little bit different. They have cemented that experience, and it's an unchanging kind of experience. And my guess is they don't obsess about it, think about it, maybe as much as the other people would. Putting something into words simplify things. Yes, it could bias your memories of that traumatic experience, but that is a given. And that's kind of the nature of a narrative. It's that putting things into words changes the way that it's organized. So translating something into language changes it and simplifies it, makes it almost an abstract. This is the page you should have been looking at. Yes, okay. That's my problem, is I just can't read Italian very well. Yes. Okay, so actually I'm doing just fine. The other thing that's interesting is it changes something that's called working memory. There was a lovely study that was published about 20 years ago. And what this project did was to look at something called working memory. So the idea of working memory, or sometimes referred to as executive function, is that when you're under a lot of stress, you keep thinking about the stress all the time. And we can do experiments with people who are under stress versus not under stress. People under stress, if you give all these people, let's say, a memory task, okay, I want you to remember the following 6 words. Apple, Volkswagen, green, Oklahoma, etc. And then I start talking about some other stuff. And then in 20 minutes, I ask you, what were those words that I said? If you're under stress, you will not remember them as well. If you're not under stress, you'll do much better. And the fact is, when you're not under stress, you have more working memory. You can listen better, you can retain information better, et cetera. That's why when all of us are under stress, we're more forgetful. Of course we're forgetful because we're not taking in the information, and it's harder to get the information out. In this particular study, they had a large number of college students who were first beginning college students to come in and take a working memory test. Half of them then were asked to write about their deepest thoughts and feelings about coming to college, and the other half wrote about superficial topics. What they found is when they brought those people in again and again over the next several months, the people who had written had better working memory than the people who did not. And those people with the better working memory had better grades than the people in the control conditions. Writing about it, they pointed out, it essentially stilled the mind. And this brings up another thing. When your mind is still, that is, when you're not obsessing and ruminating as much, you do in fact sleep better, as we found in these other studies. But there's one final feature to this which I find profoundly important, and that is expressive writing changes the degree to which people socially connect with others. So for example, a person who, we've done several studies now where we devised essentially a glorified tape recorder. It comes on for 30 seconds and goes off for 12 minutes. And you wear this tape recorder for 2 days. And we ask people to do this before they're in our experiment and then a month later. And then what we do is we transcribe this, and we're trying to get a sense of, do people change in their social behaviors? And the answer is yes. Those who write about traumatic experiences end up talking more to people, they laugh more, they're more connected. In other words, one thing we know in the world of health is there are a few things we can trust, and one is having a social support network. Having friends is a powerful predictor of health and a buffer against traumatic experience. And if a person now has better working memory, they're a better friend. They can listen to their friends better. They can be more responsive. They can be more empathic. In other words, expressive writing is bringing about changes because it changes the way it's organized in the brain. It simplifies it. It clears up working memory. And it also helps to create a story that makes that is easier to summarize, and it results in your sleeping better and being more connected with others. Now, usually at this time, I will ask, does anybody have any questions? And there'll be lots and lots of questions. Let me just answer a few things, some of the questions that you may well have been thinking about. Is there any difference between writing about a traumatic experience versus talking about it? There have been several studies on this, and if you stand back and squint, you're going to come away with the sense that there's no difference, and I think that's generally true. But these are talking studies where people are talking into a tape recorder or talking to a tree where there's no feedback. When you talk to somebody else about a trauma, you are playing a dangerous game. And all of us have had this experience. You start to tell a friend about some upsetting experience, and you look at on their face, and you look that sense of horror that they don't want to hear this, and all of a sudden you change the story a little bit so you walk away. Because sometimes when you tell a story, other people may think less of you, that it actually may hurt them. There is a social cost potentially. If the other person is completely open, then I think talking to another person may be as good or even better than writing. The second is, what about the instructions? Do you have to write 4 days? No. Do you have to write about your most traumatic experience? No. You can write about anything you want. How many times do you have to write? I don't care. There are multiple studies on this. This is going to upset some of you and thrill others. If you really like structure and order, you're not going to like what I'm about to say. Expressive writing can be done any way you want. There's no one right way or wrong way. I drive people nuts because I don't run workshops and I don't license people for expressive writing. How do you do it? I don't know. Experiment. See what works best for you. Do I write? I do. I write sometimes, but I don't write all the time. I think writing all the time, I can't imagine writing every day. That depresses me. Some people do. Great, but I don't. To me, the important issue is find a place where you will be by yourself and then just start writing. And promise yourself you'll write at least 10 minutes for 3 consecutive days. And if you want to write more, write more. If you want to write less, write less. What should you write about? What are the issues that are weighing on you, that are bugging you, that keep coming through your mind? When I write, often I get up at 2 in the morning and I've been having some fight with somebody at work or maybe with my wife or whatever, and I'll get up and I'll start writing about it, and usually I'll just do that. And then I'll go to bed, and I go to bed very quickly. But what I encourage people to do is to experiment. See what works best for you. Sometimes people do better if they write with their left hand, others with their right hand. Doesn't matter. What about if you speak multiple languages? What language should you use? I don't know. Experiment. There have been some studies showing that people doing work with bilinguals, people who write on one day in one language and the next day in the other language tend to benefit a little bit more than if they write about something in just a single language. Are there any dangers to expressive writing? I do think the one thing is that writing about it, if you've had a major horrible trauma and you think that writing about it might not be good for you, it probably won't be good for you. What I tell people is write when you think you're thinking about something too much. If you've had a major trauma and you're thinking about it all the time, and the trauma was yesterday, that's not too much. Writing probably will not be beneficial, and it could be harmful. If it's now a year later and you're still thinking about it all the time, that's too much, and writing can be really beneficial. So all of these things that I've been telling you are kind of a broad overview of the power of writing and what might work. And I'll stay around a little bit later and am happy to talk to you about it in terms of ways to, if you have any additional questions. And my email here is at the bottom. Feel free to get in touch with me. So that's it. I'm 1 minute over. Thank you all very much. And
Okay, I thank Professor Pennebaker for his fantastic lecture. He was able to tell 40 years of research in less than 40 minutes, just 30 minutes. It's a miracle. Please prepare some questions for the last session. We will sit here with Professor Pennebaker and Professor Marta Fadda. I will present just in a few minutes. Now I turn in Italian to present the reading intermezzo, perché questo intermezzo è un po', come dire, isolato rispetto alle lezioni e anche per ragioni di registrazione, poi verrà messo tutto su YouTube, questa parte è in italiano. Abbiamo con noi il piacere di sentire recitare questo pezzo, leggere questo brano di cui vi parlerò. Igor Horvat è un noto attore teatrale, cinematografico e televisivo anche, e interpreterà questa lettura intitolata Questo buio feroce, tratto dal libro Questo buio feroce, storia della mia morte di Harold Brodkey. Chi è questo Harold Brodkey? È uno dei maggiori scrittori americani del secolo scorso. E questo libro è legato alla sua esperienza drammatica, perché fu colto dall'AIDS a 66 anni, quando ancora in un'epoca in cui non esistevano cure per la malattia, e quindi questo lo condannò. Era consapevole di quello che sarebbe stato il suo destino e scrisse questo libro di memorie, che è un libro straordinario per la lucidità e il modo con cui ha di affrontare questo argomento senza angoscia e senza dolore. Quindi invito Igor Horvat al podio. Grazie.
Un giorno, terminato un articolo sul quale stavo lavorando, nello specifico un pezzo sugli Academy Awards per il New Yorker, mi sono deciso ad andare dal dottore, Barry Hartman. Non avevo ancora abbastanza confidenza per dargli del tu senza imbarazzi. Il dottor Hartman era il mio nuovo internista, uno specialista in malattie infettive che era subentrato al medico che mi aveva sempre curato. Barry guardò allora le mie radiografie, osservò la mia magrezza e mi disse che poteva trattarsi o di AIDS o di pneumocistis. E io mi feci beffa delle sue diagnosi. Per accontentare mia moglie, Ellen Schwamm, accettai di sottopormi al test per la sieropositività, ma non volli saperne di andare in ospedale. Barry allora si incaricò personalmente di telefonarci per comunicare il risultato dell'analisi. Gli dissi di non preoccuparsi, io ero tranquillo. Tornai a casa, presi l'antibiotico ad ampio spettro che proprio lui mi aveva prescritto e ripresi a lavorare correggendo al telefono con il redattore il pezzo sugli Academy Awards. Mi affliggevano bronchite influenzale e febbre, ma non certo cattivi presentimenti. Certo l'attesa dell'analisi un po' mi turbava, anche perché non si sa mai quali sorprese Dio abbia in serbo per te nella sua manica. Era passato moltissimo tempo, perché preoccuparsi? Perché rimproverare se stessi per avere atteso troppo prima di... No, non c'era bisogno di appesantire troppo la propria coscienza, non avevo rimorsi. Eppure, la sera dopo, ero tanto peggiorato che temetti di morire, di malattia, intendo, per la prima volta nella mia vita. Non riuscivo a trovare appigli cui aggrapparmi per fare fronte ad una bufera di sensazioni orribili. Ellen si prendeva cura di me con un'attenzione e una dolcezza speciali, senza risparmio, instancabilmente. Non era mai stata così con me. Era strano come la malattia, nel frattempo, si facesse più pesante e ostinata di ora in ora, con una sorta di silenziosa rapidità. Crollava in un abisso di indicibile orrore, lo consolidava e poi sprofondava sordamente in un abisso ancora più profondo. Io avevo cercato con tutte le mie forze di tenere una facciata per Ellen, per rassicurarla, ma presto arrivò il momento in cui tutto smise di funzionare. Il senso inquietante di asfissia e capogiro non accennava a calmarsi. D'un tratto scoprì che non riuscivo più a respirare, nemmeno mettendomi seduto, e allora mi arresi e decisi che era giunto il momento di andare in ospedale. Con un tubo nel naso per respirare, avvolto in un lenzuolo e immobile su una barella, fui spinto dagli infermieri dell'ambulanza attraverso il nostro appartamento, poi in ascensore, poi lungo l'atrio, oltre il portiere, sul marciapiede, all'aria aperta per un attimo, e poi dentro l'ambulanza. Fu così che finì la mia vita e cominciò la mia morte. Quando Barry mi disse finalmente che avevo l'AIDS, gli dissi che non gli credevo. Credimi, fece allora lui. Ma in quel momento facevo così fatica a respirare che del resto mi importava poco o nulla. Mi vergognavo solo all'idea che le persone preposte alle mie cure, là in ospedale, dovessero prendere precauzioni speciali per proteggere se stesse. Forse perché cominciavo ad entrare in competizione con l'idea del tutto preconcetta che la mia morte sarebbe stata diversa dalle altre, più dura da sopportare, e che la condanna a una morte, a una sofferenza del genere fosse insostenibile tanto per me quanto per chi mi circondava. Io non la pensavo così. Non volevo pensarla così. I momenti in cui accettai consapevolmente la realtà di avere l'AIDS sono nebulosi, frammentari, e si presentano alla mia memoria sotto diversi aspetti. Ero al New York Hospital, in una stanza privata. Passando dall'ambulanza alla stanza privata pareva già chiaro che la mia polmonite fosse legata all'AIDS. Respiravo a fatica, avevo la febbre alta ed ero drogato di farmaci, anche se non pesantemente come in seguito. Non ero certamente al mio meglio, eppure mi preoccupavo con un briciolo di vanità di come potevo apparire agli occhi di Ellen. Immagino si trattasse di un modo maschile di preoccuparmi dei suoi sentimenti, delle sue reazioni, senza preoccuparmi veramente di lei. La febbre mi aggrediva a ondate acide. Mi pareva di essere prossimo ad una sorta di castrazione finale, di reale impotenza. Ricordo Ellen che chiedeva a Barry cosa sarebbe successo dopo. Lui rispose che risolta la pneumocistis avrei avuto buone possibilità di vivere ancora qualche anno. Sì, ma sarà imbarazzante, pensai allora io, immaginando tutte le conseguenze, il marchio infamante della mia malattia, l'incontinenza, la cecità. Ero decisamente troppo presuntuoso per una morte del genere. Accolsi le prime emozioni legate all'accettazione di avere l'AIDS non con l'acuta consapevolezza con cui tento di scrivere narrativa. Non provavo quel tipo di isolamento, ma con un senso diverso di solitudine. D'altra parte sentivo con chiarezza che io non ero più io. Ellen certamente stava già soffrendo a sufficienza. Ricordo di averla sentita piangere quando scoprì di non essere stata contagiata dal virus. Disse che la deprimeva l'idea di essere separata così da me. Io dal canto mio pensavo che, vista la mia condizione, lei avesse il diritto invece di lasciarmi. La malattia nella mia testa interrompeva tutti i vincoli, i contratti, i sentimenti. Noi non eravamo più noi, io non ero più io. Mi ero ammalato raramente da bambino o da adulto, ma ogni volta in modo grave, quasi fatale. Ero ipocondriaco, andavo in palestra, facevo lunghe camminate, ero prudente, ipersensibile alla qualità dell'aria, al caldo e al freddo, al rumore e agli odori. Ero un soggetto che si stancava più velocemente della maggior parte della gente a causa di tutte queste reazioni estreme e come tale badavo a non ammalarmi. Il mio umore Il mio stato d'animo e il mio panorama mentale avevano una grande stabilità di fondo. Certo, questa stabilità adesso è scomparsa. Dal momento in cui i miei polmoni hanno ridotto del 50% la capacità di pompare ossigeno e nel nostro appartamento sono arrivati gli ausiliari dell'ambulanza con una barella e una bombola, da quel momento in poi, all'ospedale come ora, non ho più avuto un attimo di stabilità fisica. A intermittenza vengo inondato dal suono di un moto ondoso come fossi una conchiglia e il sangue mi sembra spumeggiare o formicolare. La mia temperatura è troppo alta o troppo bassa. Ho avuto crisi di asfissia. Ho avuto una pleurite al polmone destro, un'infiammazione della cavità toracica che sembrava un irrigidimento bruciante dei muscoli e mi provocava un dolore lancinante quando tossivo, quando facevo un movimento brusco o mi chinavo a raccogliere qualcosa. E, naturalmente, potrei morire in qualsiasi momento o sviluppare i sintomi di una malattia completamente nuova. La mia vita si è trasformata irreversibilmente in questa morte. Un bambino pieno di traumi, come me, capace di riprendersi, di sistemarsi nel mondo, impara a mettere un muro tra sé e la disperazione, tra sé e la sofferenza, tra sé e il farsela sotto. È questo il mio parametro. Misurare tutto il peso della mia vita in rapporto a un intestino ben educato. Il resto è follia, rabbia, umiliazione. Così, in poco tempo, ho compreso che il mio corpo non poteva più farcela, non da solo. Il senso della presenza era scomparso, così come quello della poesia e dello stile. Sì, il senso dello stile, il senso del pensiero, mi abbandonò completamente. Scomparve, senza lasciare traccia. Mi restava solo una vaga idea, quasi del tutto perduta, della fatica che ci sarebbe voluta per pensare o intuire una metafora e di quanto fossi del tutto lontano dalla possibilità di farlo. Tutto era ridotto ormai all'asfissia e alla condanna a morte, alla democrazia da termitaio e a ondate chimiche di malessere e calore, al lento e implacabile sobbollire della malattia dentro di me. E non c'era niente che fosse una frase o il seme di un discorso, niente che facesse luce in tutto questo buio, niente che parlasse di un significato, di qualcosa al di là del mio respiro e di quello di Ellen curva sul mio letto nella penombra. Attento soltanto al respiro, senza poter pensare ad altro. Nel mio morire, forse, ero davvero vivo. Ero vivo in modo completo, in modo umano, in modo reale. Sì. Era reale, ero reale. Così la condanna a morte non mi ha più preoccupato. No, non mi preoccupa. Più ne comprendo la natura reale, meno mi preoccupo. Tutto ciò che è reale non può preoccuparmi. Quando ero nella stanza dell'ospedale ripetevo a me stesso: la morte e l'AIDS sono cose all'ordine del giorno. Fanno parte di questo mondo e si verificano di continuo. Barry, Ellen, miei cari, perché non ridete? In fondo non è niente di speciale quello che mi capita, no. Si tratta solo di morire. Non è come perdere i capelli o restare senza soldi del tutto in bolletta, no, e per fortuna che non devo vivere con questi problemi. Su, vi prego, ridete. No, non guardatemi così, no, tutto questo è reale e basta. Si può essere stanchi del mondo, stanchi dei re della preghiera, dei re della poesia, i cui rituali sono un intrattenimento umano e gradevole, ma assolutamente irritante perché non hanno alcuna realtà, mentre la realtà in sé continua a essere molto preziosa. Il desiderio è di intravedere degli squarci di reale. Dio è un'immensità, mentre la malattia, questa morte che è in me, questo piccolo evento pedestre circoscritto entro confini tanto precisi, è semplicemente reale, privo di miracoli o di istruzioni. Sono in piedi su una zattera che ha sciolto gli ormeggi, una piccola chiatta che si muove sulla fluida superficie scorrevole di un fiume. È precaria. L'ignoranza dell'ignoto, l'equilibrio difficile, i sobbalzi e l'instabilità si allargano in ampie increspature su tutti i miei pensieri. Pace. Non ce n'è mai stata alcuna nel mondo. Ma ora sto viaggiando sull'acqua arrendevole sotto il cielo, senza ormeggi, e mi sento ridere, con un certo nervosismo all'inizio e poi con genuino stupore. È tutta intorno a me.
Un ringraziamento davvero sentito a Igor Horvat per la sua splendida interpretazione. Questo brano, tra l'altro, dobbiamo ricordare sempre che Riccardo Favaro, il drammaturgo, riesce a riassemblare in un brano che sembra essere stato scritto per essere quello che è stato letto da un libro. Quindi è un lavoro notevolissimo di condensazione, e quindi ci dà, è come se in pratica il libro l'avessimo quasi letto. E questo autore è morto nel 96, questo Harold Brodkey. Chissà se aveva letto qualche studio di James Pennebaker, perché mi sembra che questo uso della scrittura sia proprio anche per avere una possibilità, direi, di resistere a queste angosce. È come se avesse avuto proprio una terapia dall'aver scritto questo libro. Now I turn in English because we are continuing our trip in science, and it's time of our discussant of this evening, Professor Marta Fadda, and I'm going to present her, and then I will call her to the podium. Marta Fadda is a postdoctoral researcher and lecturer for the course in Biomedical Ethics of the Master in Medicine in Biomedical Science Faculty of this university. She holds a Master of Bioethics from Harvard University, a PhD in Health Communication at this university, and also a Master in Cultural Anthropology from the University of London, School of Oriental and African Studies. Her research interests lie at intersection between ethics and communication, and also between clinical public health and biomedical research. So it's a very, very broad covering research. And recently she has conducted and carries out research on the role of patient biographies in a clinical practice. And she will talk just about this. The title of her presentation is The Power of Written Patient Biographies. Please, Professor Fadda comes to the podium.
Buonasera a tutte e a tutti. Good evening, everyone. So, Professor Pennebaker has opened the door for us to the healing power of writing. He's provided us with a tool that is extremely valuable and that can provide benefits to our health, both our physical and our mental health. The impact of his research program has been tremendous. Yet, there are still questions to ask, problems to solve, things to do to improve our experience of healing and illness, particularly as we navigate the healthcare system. I would like to shift gears now and invite you to join me in a little exercise of imagination. Imagine to enter this building. You're going there because you have a problem that desperately needs fixing. And you've heard that within these walls, there are some people who are trained to help people who are facing similar challenges as yours. But the moment you step inside, something happens. A stranger approaches, and almost immediately, you're asked to get rid of your clothes, and you're handed a uniform to wear. You look around, and you see a lot of other people wearing the same attire. Suddenly, the meaningful moments of your life all stop. The 3 p.m. coffee with your colleague, the afternoon at the park with your kids, the Thursday night pizza ritual, they all come to a halt. Your world, as you know it, is temporarily suspended. There's a sense of uncertainty regarding how long you're going to stay within these walls. And here's the kicker. The comforting presence of those who matter most to you is limited. Visits are not only regulated, but extremely brief. The anchors that have anchored your life, the social markers that scream, "This is who I am," they're all left outside of this place. Now, as you're entering this situation, ask yourself, what would you like to say to those people who will be helping you and to fix your problem as a statement about yourself? Some of you may relate with the experience that I've just described. It's the hospital experience. Hospitalization can divest patients of their identity. Hospitalized patients often have to wear hospital gowns. They have to give up their valued objects. They have to share communal spaces and rely on the help of medical staff for their care. And on top of this, patients are separated from their usual relationships. These too can profoundly impact their identity. Our relationships serve as a mirror, reflecting back to us aspects of who we are, the way others perceive us, their feedback, the roles we play in various relationships contribute to the construction of our identity. Importantly, hospitalized patients may be seen primarily as symptoms and medical conditions, and such type of care may overlook valued aspects of patients' biographies, such as their cultural and professional background, their social relationships, meaningful past and present events, future plans, priorities. Such a strong emphasis on the clinical rather than biographical aspects of people's life does not surprise. After all, providers need to follow protocols. They may fear emotional distress, they may fear compromised clinical objectivity if they know their patients too much. And we know this very well. Time is limited for interactions between patients and their providers. Some have tried to overcome these obstacles, these limitations, and bring patients' life stories inside the hospital so that patients could be known and seen as persons with their unique identities and not only patients with their medical conditions. These methods fall under the term biographical approaches, and these approaches consist in eliciting a person's life story from either the patient, the individual, or their family members. One of these methods are patient diaries. They're written by the care team and by the family to provide an ongoing narrative regarding day-to-day activities involving critically ill patients during their hospitalization. Another method is life story work. This involves collecting an account of a person's life in order to plan their care and treatment. These memories are usually collected through interviews with providers or with trained interviewers. And they can be recorded in many formats, including a written book or a book of photographs. And dignity therapy, which is an intervention involving end-of-life patients that aims to offer them an opportunity to reflect on their life story and also on issues that are important to them in order to relieve psycho-emotional and existential distress. Research on these interventions has shown some promising outcomes on both the patients and their providers. First of all, these approaches can contribute to a more humane and person-centered care. Rather than focusing on illness and suffering alone, sharing one's life story allows patients to feel valued and recognized in their selfhood, transcending the experience of being ill and humanizing both providers and patients. Writing and sharing one's biography may also bring patients to new levels of trust with their providers. A physician who invites a patient to share their life story may be perceived as more trustworthy, and on the other hand, being recognized by the physician as a person can create the bond of trust that is so fundamental to create a strong therapeutic relationship. As we have seen before, these approaches may also be therapeutic and empowering. They can be therapeutic because they allow patients to give voice to what they endure and frame the illness to avoid being dominated by it. And also, writing one's biography may nurture the belief that patients actually have a key role in their own healing and that their health outcomes will not be determined solely by their medical treatments. Patient biographies can also be important for clinical ethics by shedding light on important ethical questions and issues that may otherwise go unnoticed. They render the patient's point of view, and they can clarify a patient's or a surrogate decision or different perspectives on an ethical dilemma. But patients' biographies can be transformative for providers as well. They can alter clinical evaluations, they can induce self-reflection, they can enhance concern for their patients with empathy, professionalism, and trustworthiness. So ultimately, biographical approaches can enhance more effective, more efficient care by allowing patients to tell the whole story, and as a result, leading to a more focused diagnostic exercise, higher chances of reaching the correct diagnosis, and eventually greater patient compliance and fewer healthcare costs. But there are some limitations to these approaches. In most cases, these biographies are not written by patients themselves, but by their family members. And second, when they're written by patients themselves, they are later edited by professionals, introducing some risks to the authenticity of these stories. Since 2019, the visceral surgery team of the Ente Ospedaliero Cantonale has been carried out a unique initiative in the context of patient biographies. The initiative is called Conoscersi meglio e curare meglio. Knowing each other better is better care. And it consists of eliciting written biographies directly from patients and without professional editing shortly before their hospital admission for major elective surgery. Patients can respond to this invitation by writing and sharing a 1 to 2 page biography, and each biography is then read by the care team in charge for the patient before their hospitalizations and included in the electronic health records. With colleagues from USI, Harvard University, the University of Geneva, and the Ente Ospedaliero Cantonale, we asked ourselves, what do patients share and how do they share it? How do they structure their written biographies? And how can this information help us to better understand what people strongly value in their care? We looked for commonalities and differences among the biographies in the way they were structured from patients. We looked for narrative turns, moments when the text suddenly changes. And we also looked for all those informations that patients choose to focus on when they're given the chance to tell their story to their care team providers. 3 of us conducted a narrative analysis of each biography independently, and then we discussed the results of our analysis during weekly calls. And the analysis involved blocking out the text according to time, past, present, or future, and the level of intimacy, internals or externals. Internals are things that are very personal and very close to you, like your feelings, your thoughts, your personal experiences, and externals are things that are more general and more on the surface and not as personal, like facts, events, or general information. They may not be as private or deeply connected to your personal life. We randomly selected a sample of 10 biographies for this analysis out of approximately 60. And these biographies were written by 7 women and 3 men. Their age ranged between 46 and 68. So what we found is really remarkable. First of all, patients used a striking level of detail to tell their life stories. The biographies we read were full of rich details. Let me read a quote, which we have de-identified and modified to protect confidentiality. My name is Laura. I was born in 1972 in Lisbon, Portugal. My father died at the age of 71, and my mother at the age of 92. I have an older sister who was born in 1966. She has 3 wonderful kids, Joshua, Michael, and Lisa. Patients share details about their personal histories, their relationships, their interests, their hopes with a remarkable degree of granularity. They describe their characteristics such as personality and character, their upbringing, their relocation from one place to another. They opened up about their achievements in terms of career, education. They wrote about their struggles, such as the loss of important people. Such a great amount of detail may apparently seem to go far beyond what is needed to guide medical treatment. Yet, this investment underscores something truly important. Patients want to be recognized by their providers through a comprehensive account of their identity. They want to be recognized for who they are. They want to be seen as an invaluable, irreplaceable, and unique human being while they're going through the hospital. These fine details are needed in order to understand the complexity of one's story and to appreciate what it is like to be them, what matters to them in the present, and what their future hopes are. And it seems that in order for providers to truly understand their patients and their unique needs, it may be necessary for them to gain an appreciation of their experiences, relationships, and interests that have shaped and perhaps are still shaping their lives. Another striking aspect of the biographies we analyzed, besides the level of details provided, was their level of intimacy. Patients shared intimate self-reflections on struggles and traumatic events, but also achievements and elements of personal growth. Some biographies reached such a level of intimacy to resemble the private disclosure one would confine to a personal memoir. Let me read a meaningful quote. I find myself resistant to listening to the experiences or anecdotes of friends and family who have navigated this challenging journey before. At the same time, I'm grappling with the struggle of projecting a different version of myself. It's hard to laugh when there's an internal void, and engaging in conversation becomes taxing when I feel drained inside. The intent of providing such an intimate account is to take the providers to the patient's most intimate place. That's the place of unspoken emotions and thoughts. Patients share these intimate aspects of their lives as a way of expressing trust in their providers because they want to establish meaningful relationships with them. Remember that patients only had very superficial contact with the care team prior to their hospitalization. Most had only met the surgeon once or twice. So the trust enacted through their biographies is particularly powerful. And this is also a very peculiar type of way to enact trust. We usually demonstrate trust by submitting to an intervention, but here patients are showing trust in a different way. This trust is the confidence is sharing one's most intimate feelings and reflections in order to forge a meaningful connection. If we think about it, the capacity to create genuine connections with others is almost never built via anything cheerful. It is the result of making ourselves vulnerable before another human being by revealing something that is broken, confused, lost, lonely, in pain with us. Similarly, patients seem to be aware that in order to make real connections, they need to share in a frank way what matters to them overwhelmingly. The biographies we analyzed reveal patients' desire to be seen by their providers and to establish meaningful connections with them. A third finding is that patients recognized a risk that their identities may be overlooked or even damaged inside the hospital. Dear doctor, you asked me to write about who I am beyond my illness. Let me begin by saying that I'm a 63-year-old boy. Challenges hardly dampen my spirits. I navigate life with an innate optimism, consistently seeking the positive aspects in every situation. I am grateful for the opportunity of writing about myself. So there is a strong sense of gratitude pouring out from these biographies. There is a recognition from patients that they were given a unique opportunity, and they repeatedly thank their provider for giving it to them. Patients know they're going to be in distress. They know they have to let go pretty much all that they built their identity around. They know that they will not be able to share this important information about themselves. And those who could do it for them, family, friends, they won't be there. So they know that there is a chance that their identities may be overlooked or damaged. And unless people personally know them, they're just another patient. In such a position, recognized and connected, patients ask their providers to protect their identity during their surgeries and hospitalizations. And this does not surprise. In studies conducted with people who experience problems in a healthcare setting, patients reported that their personal identity was perceived as being challenged through experiences which were felt to be disempowering, dehumanizing, and devaluing. And our analysis demonstrated that patients are aware of the risk that their personal identities could be threatened during their hospitalizations, and that their biography may represent a tool to mitigate such a risk. So our study showed that writing and sharing a brief biography may be an extremely powerful tool. It can allow providers to really know patients as unique persons through a personal account of their identity in a very concrete way. It can facilitate the establishment and strengthening of meaningful connections between patients and their providers, and it can mitigate patients' sense of risk that their identity may be damaged, contributing at the same time to safeguarding patients' identity during their hospitalization. The hospital may feel impersonal, dehumanizing, and devaluing for patients. There's a sense that when we walk in a hospital, we have to give up our own story. And once we give it up, we become a kind of invisible thing. We become just a body. Our study expands on the work of Professor Pennebaker on the therapeutic benefits of expressive writing, showing that writing can contribute to healing also in other ways. This form of writing is a powerful tool for patients to share their story, but also for providers to hold it. By writing and sharing their words, patients are expressing their desire to be seen, to be recognized, to have meaningful connections with their providers, and to be protected by them. Ultimately, by writing and sharing their biography, patients are aware that they can get the best possible care. Thank you.
counselor, you have a beautiful occasion to ask questions. You can also, thank you very much. I was forgetting to thank you for your outstanding presentation. And we are very happy to see that this practice is going on in the hospital in Lugano and also in other parts, probably of Switzerland. And I hope that this experience will spread to other hospitals and maybe also in Italy, because in Italy I'm not sure that they are using these methods yet. Okay, now coming back to the question time. You can pose question also in Italian, I think, because they will be translated in English, so don't be shy, please. Who is going to ask some or comment or whatever? Okay. Icebreaker, yes. Please.
Oh.
Tell us who are you and from where you are.
I'm from here. My name is Carrie, and I'm a student in nursing. So I have a question for Marta Fadda. So firstly, everything you said was just amazing and beautiful. Thank you. My question would be how, in my personal and professional experience, how can you bring providers to actually care more about knowing about the biography of the patient, given the fact you just said it's so beneficial for them to write it? So my question would be, how do we get like providers to put a better accent, like give more importance to this biography the patient would be writing? Like in my experience, personal and professional, there's not really the time to.
Do you mean what in practice providers could do after they have acquired their biographies, or how can they elicit them?
No, how do I say? Both, I would say both.
So to elicit patient biographies, for example, you could use this tool and asking them to share them before they come to the hospital, let's say for a hospital stay, for a surgery, like in this case.
Yeah, that's clear. But my, how do we get the providers, nurses, doctors to care more about this? Like in my personal and professional experience, I don't want to sound mean, but there's not really much of the time to get this done.
Yeah.
So my question for you would be, how do we improve this for providers, not for the patients? Like, if you have any suggestions or anything.
So first of all, there will be some providers that you will never be able to convince. And unfortunately, this is the truth. Some will never, even if you show them the benefits of these tools, some will never really implement them. But those who are sensitive to these tools, they can be made aware that there is such a tool, and they can receive training, for example. We can move on with research to show the benefits with harder data than these, of course, so this information can be shared. But I also saw a hand raised there because there's another member of the study team who's sitting there who actually has the direct experience in eliciting these biographies, and he may have something to say. Professor Maino, I saw you raised your hand.
This question is in fact the topic of the next talk about how we eliciting the biographies have been changed by that. But in fact, just to anticipate a little bit, it's very easy because in fact, caregivers are eager to know about their patients without the constraint of time, and having their biography written by the patient, in fact, saves time rather than needs time for the patient. So It's in fact a very easy tool to use and no resistance at all from the providers, even the ones who have very little time with the patient, like the anesthetist, for instance. The biography is sent to the anesthetist, so the anesthetist reads through it. It's 1 page or 2 pages. It's rare that there are 3 pages or more. Most of them are very brief, and in fact they validate all the feelings that Marta Fadda was talking about. They're just deeply grateful to be asked, to be recognized, and to have found a guardian of their identity. And the way they use it, they are not too prolific in writing the biographies, but providers are very happy to have them. No resistance at all.
I think it was a very legitimate and valid question. And if I think about all the times that I presented the results of this study to providers, my presentation was immediately met by concerns. Oh, but I'm going to be in distress if I know too much. I'm not going to be able to reach a correct diagnosis. So you are right, on the one side, some may not care in the sense that they may not appreciate the benefits of this tool and may see it actually as introducing more problems rather than solving them. So in fact, when you explain this tool and its potential, you should be ready to address all these concerns and all these questions from the very beginning, because they're going to come for sure.
Vado in italiano. Gwenda Bernegger, insegno etica alla SUPSI. Mi ha colpito nel tuo discorso, Marta, l'elemento della sorpresa rispetto alla quantità di elementi appunto personali, intimi che vengono portati. E appunto, andando un po', come dire, a fare l'avvocato del diavolo, mi chiedo effettivamente quanto questa quantità di questo materiale così, che va forse al di là appunto di quello che è veramente possibile poi accogliere, elaborare nel contesto in cui ci si trova, non rischia anche di creare un problema di eccesso di esposizione, perché proprio appunto, magari proseguo anche la riflessione critica di prima. Mi ricordo uno studio vecchio di Catherine Young della fine del secolo scorso, che raccontava di come al momento in cui il paziente entra in ospedale accade precisamente quel processo che dici, no? Di dismettere la propria identità, e che questo però accade proprio per poter portare un corpo alla fine che si viene trattato, che è sconnesso dalla propria identità, anche per essere meno vulnerabili. Al momento in cui io scrivo, no, e poi di solito quando esco dalla struttura mi posso riabbigliare, no, della mia identità. E in realtà in questo processo di scrittura molto bello, in cui credo moltissimo, diciamo, sono anch'io allieva di Rita Sharon, quindi credo molto in questo processo, comunque c'è una grande esposizione di un'ulteriore vulnerabilità, e quindi la mia domanda, preoccupazione, appunto, come veramente poi sia in condizione di far sì che questa esposizione in più non sia fonte di ulteriori difficoltà.
Posso rispondere al commento? Rispondo in italiano?
Sì.
Intanto grazie per questo commento. In realtà c'è veramente un rischio non solo che queste biografie non servano a nulla, ma appunto, come dici tu, che creino dei danni, che espongano le persone ad ulteriori vulnerabilità. E sono veramente tante informazioni da digerire e da elaborare per un curante. Quindi quello che stiamo facendo adesso è un'ulteriore analisi di queste biografie. Adesso stiamo prendendo tutte le 60, adesso penso che saranno anche 70, giusto? Si sono accumulate nel frattempo, e le stiamo analizzando da un punto di vista del contenuto, dei temi, in modo tale che da offrire ai curanti uno strumento per leggerle in maniera selettiva. E abbiamo già identificato 3 livelli. Il primo è quello dei fatti, sono tantissimi. I pazienti, le pazienti inseriscono in queste biografie tantissimi eventi, tantissimi fatti. Avete visto, sono nata, i miei genitori, il mio divorzio, i miei figli, i miei nipoti, veramente eventi molto specifici che effettivamente non sembra che abbiano molto a che fare con gli aspetti clinici, e che probabilmente non servono neanche così tanto in maniera, diciamo, diretta ai curanti per curare meglio. Abbiamo identificato poi un altro livello che è quello dei significati. E questo livello è importante perché è intermedio e perché collega i fatti con le priorità. E i curanti è delle priorità che hanno bisogno. I curanti devono sapere che cos'è veramente importante per i pazienti e per le pazienti in quel momento, in quel luogo. E quindi attraverso questa analisi, dividendo fatti, significati e priorità, speriamo di offrire uno strumento, quindi non solo un'analisi narrativa di queste biografie, ma anche un ulteriore strumento per i curanti per portarsi qualcosa ed utilizzarlo veramente a beneficio dei pazienti e delle pazienti che condividono queste storie. Grazie ancora per il commento.
A method that could improve the understanding and the comprehension of the biography of the patient could be the program that Professor James Pennebaker has invented a few years ago, the word count. And you didn't talk about this. Maybe you can add this story. Just
So, one of the issues that I became interested in was how do you analyze language? And what we ended up doing was creating this computer program called Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count, LIWC, which I call Luke. The Luke computer program simply goes in and analyzes any text and calculates the percentage of words that are emotion words or certain types of cognitive words, words that suggest some kind of analytic thinking or narrative thinking, and many other dimensions. And it's very interesting listening to what has just been talked about in terms of ways of analyzing language. One thing that some of the work that's been done for people in therapy is that people, if you analyze language, you can get a sense of the degree to which people are talking about themselves versus talking about others. They're self-focused or non-self-focused, much what you talked about in your presentation. And what you find is that the more that people switch back and forth, the more they improve. Similarly, people who change in the general perspectives, not their perspectives, and also the ways that they are thinking, the more they benefit. So if people tell the same story over and over again, they generally do not improve in terms of physical health, in terms of our research, nor do we see that in a more therapeutic usage as well. I will say that the language analysis approach is still very early in its development, but it does hold promise for ways of healthcare providers being able to talk to their clients and also to learn more about their clients as well.
Other question.
Hello, I'm Andrea. I'm a medical student here in Lugano, and my question would be for Professor Pennebaker. In addition to what you just said, if there are ways we can manage to see the vocabulary one has on the impact he has in writing, and if there would be ways we could use also some kind of art in order to express some feelings or some impulses that are not available through ordinary writing?
That's a really important question. Over the last several years, there have been many projects encouraging patients, clients to express themselves non-verbally through dance or movement, through drawing or music. The one study that I was involved with this was essentially asking people to express their deepest thoughts and feelings through movement. And what we found was when we gave them the same kind of instructions, in your movement, really explore your deepest thoughts and feelings and so forth. We had people do that, and then we had another group do the expressive movement and then write afterwards. And what we found was immediately afterwards, both groups really felt that the movement was really powerful and valuable. However, what we discovered was that the long haul, in terms of changes in their performance at the university and also their doctor visits in terms of physical health. Only the group that did the movement and also wrote benefited. In a funny kind of, and that's back, I was working with a dance therapist, and the dance therapist said that's actually how she works. She has the people do the expression, and then afterwards asks them to describe what they did and ask them what they think it meant. So in some ways, I think the nonverbal therapies are really powerful if they're used in conjunction with having the person to analyze and self-reflect what their self-reflective product means.
Thank you.
Posso tornare indietro? Io non era una critica assolutamente, più che altro volevo capire una possibile applicazione di questa biografia inviata, nel senso, si pensa di metterlo come competenza dell'infermiere di reparto o piuttosto magari di prendere una persona che poi si occupa piuttosto, sempre infermiere che sia, però comunque concentrarsi piuttosto su quello che è la lettura della biografia e poi della relazione col paziente. Quello mi veniva un po' difficile da capire. È un tema che sta a cuore molto anche a me. Io farò la tesi sullo strumento di cura del diario paziente. Gwenda è la mia direttrice di tesi, quindi non volevo che venisse letta assolutamente come una critica, quando piuttosto come applicarlo nella maniera più efficiente possibile.
Sì, non l'ho presa assolutamente come una critica, anzi l'ho trovato un commento assolutamente valido e legittimo. Il mio parere, ecco, se introdurla nel curriculum come competenza, lì dobbiamo fare un passo indietro e chiederci quali sono gli obblighi dei curanti. Io sono del parere che il diritto a essere visto, riconosciuto, a essere considerato come individuo unico, insostituibile, sia un diritto inalienabile dei pazienti e delle pazienti. E quindi sarei a favore di introdurre la competenza narrativa come una competenza fondamentale in un curriculum di medicina. Questo chiaramente ha delle implicazioni e va pesato rispetto a tutte le altre competenze che un curante e una curante devono avere. E questo penso che sia appunto un dibattito in corso al quale anche tu, anche lei partecipa con il lavoro di tesi. Però questa è la mia opinione personale. Da un punto di vista pratico, non so, questo probabilmente il professor Maino è più adatto a rispondere a questa domanda, non so quanto tempo richieda per un curante leggere una pagina o 2 pagine e farla propria, perché questa è stata la loro esperienza. La mia esperienza come ricercatrice è quella di analisi e quindi probabilmente è molto più lunga nella lettura, nell'elaborazione di questo materiale. Quindi non so se il professor Maino vuole aggiungere qualcosa rispetto all'aspetto pratico, perché ha detto che è uno strumento molto facile da utilizzare, ma effettivamente le persone si chiedono come lo integriamo nella pratica di tutti i giorni, considerando i famosi limiti di tempo che abbiamo.
Più che altro anch'io la penso come lei o come te, se posso darti del tu. Adesso che sono in stage mi rendo conto che ci sono dei giorni in cui il tempo è veramente stretto. Questo non vuol dire che sto dando meno importanza, anzi io preferirei mettermi a leggere e conoscere un paziente se potessi scegliere io, però appunto mi trovo a dover ammettere adesso che sono in stage e che vivo la realtà che magari ogni tanto a livello di tempistica si è un pochino tirati coi tempi, quindi per quello mi chiedevo l'applicazione.
Due minuti e mezzo per una biografia media. In realtà poi la gente è estremamente curiosa di quel paziente di cui tu ti occuperai, quindi lo leggono avidamente e ti prende 2 minuti e mezzo. Cioè leggere 2 pagine A4 cosa ti prende? Poi le rileggi magari una volta se ti è piaciuto particolarmente, ma in realtà è uno strumento che ti fa economizzare tempo. Detto questo, perché non ci abbiamo pensato prima? E questo sarà l'argomento della mia presentazione tra 2 settimane.
Benissimo, questo è un teaser per la presentazione fine novembre, che avremo proprio una sessione sulla medicina narrativa. Laggiù vedo una mano alzata, credo che questa sia l'ultima domanda perché poi noi 45 di solito dobbiamo chiudere per ragioni anche di gestione aula. Prego.
Hello, my name is Alina. I'm Ukrainian. I'm a medical doctor with my first degree, and I'm on the process of gaining my second degree in cognitive psychology. So my question was to Professor Fadda in relation to the biography writing. So from my point of view, it's very beneficial from the side of the patients to write the story, because in this way they can change how they are perceived by the staff in the clinical setting. That's obvious. From the side of the professionals, physicians, you also stressed that it gives a great benefits. The question is how to ensure patients that actually their stories were acknowledged, recognized, analyzed, processed. So there should be the active feedback, because otherwise it's just a raw technical process from the side of the patients. So the question is, in which way practically to incorporate this doctor-patient communication to ensure the side of the patients that they were actually acknowledged and recognized? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. There is, in fact, a risk, as you say, that these biographies are read but not acted upon. And in fact, this is going to damage patients because it's not meeting their expectations to be known, to be seen, to be recognized. In fact, we don't know yet, so I don't have an answer for that. And we have a protocol that we hope will be funded next year, and we have a study that is ready to start, where we will explore exactly that issue. What happens from the moment physicians read to the moment they meet the patients, and how they integrate this information in their patient-provider communication, starting from the experience of those patients who have already done so. So stay tuned.
So probably we have to close the evening, more or less. More or less. It was a memorable evening, and I thank very much Professor James Pennebaker for his coming from Austin, and I hope that he enjoyed the talking with the audience, and also Professor Marta Fadda for her contribution. I am between a superstar, well established, and a growing star of the science. Who knows? Maybe
Who knows?
in about few years you will raise.